Today's question is about
Turkesterone.
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 Turkesterone. Hey Dr. Hotchkiss, what's your opinion on turkesterone? Well, I don't really have an opinion on turkesterone, because to be honest, I don't know a thing about it. I always opted for big boy PEDs. But I do happen to know a lot of really brilliant minds in the industry, like Derek.
What's up guys, it's Derek from MorePlays4Days.com.
Who was one of the first to put out a turkesterone supplement, but he was busy destroying planets with his delts.
Why you bullying me?
So I reached out to my good friend Marwan. Marwan's a registered nurse and a second-year medical student, soon to be an MD. Marwan is one of the most brilliant minds I've ever come across. And I'm not alone there. Greg Doucette thinks so too, and that's why he hired Marwan as the Director of Research and Development at HTLT Supplements. Marwan has developed many of Greg's top supplements, including his newest one, Turk Builder. So I hopped on a call with Marwan to ask him, what is turkesterone?
So turkesterone has got a lot of hype as of recently, but what you might have not known is that it was very popular in the early 2000s, and it's a plant defense chemical essentially that the plants make to survive, and they do a very good job at killing insects, but it turns out they actually do have biological effects in humans. Like ectosteroids is the class of compounds that it's in. Now humans don't have an ectosteroid receptor, but just like many other compounds in nature, they can mimic some of our own endogenous hormones.
Okay, that's what it is, but how exactly is it working? What's its mechanism of action?
We don't have direct data looking at turkesterone, but we do have a lot of human data looking at ectosterone, which is the parent compound of turkesterone. And the mechanism is pretty cool, where they've recently found that it mimics this hormone called angiotensin 1-7, where it has to do a lot with the RAS, where it kind of counteracts the negative effects of the RAS, where you have inflammation, fibrosis, and it also somehow downstream upregulates protein synthesis through this pathway, where other hormones like IGF-1, testosterone, estradiol, they also activate this part of the RAS. It's called the protective arm of the RAS. And when we look at the more macroscopic picture, because I don't like to get too focused on single mechanisms, because I think it probably has a lot of other things that it does. They looked at the blood work of people taking this ectosterone compound when they were treating them for COVID, and they found their aldosterone levels slightly decreased, same with the renin, so that kind of supports the previous hypothesis. And the myostatin ironically went up in the ectosterone group, but that is hypothesized to be a reaction to the patient's not losing muscle, so as a result their body doesn't need to compensate by downregulating myostatin. Long-winded explanation, but it's kind of like an odd finding. But you do see the creatine kinase went down in the COVID patients, and the current trial they're doing now is on sarcopenia in hospital patients. When we look at the actual COVID trial, we see something very profound. You see that there is a great risk reduction in time to death from COVID and respiratory failure. So what that means is people with severe COVID, when they took ectosterone, it reduced the need for them to get mechanical ventilation, ECMO, and like basically stop them from declining. And when you think about respiratory distress syndrome, it can happen for many reasons, but I like to think about it partly due to muscular failure, because we breathe by using our muscles, and perhaps this compound is kind of preventing some of the atrophy that happens to the respiratory like musculature. That's just my hypothesis, by the way. It's more anti-catabolic when you isolate the 20-HE.
Okay.
This was a study done a few months ago. They got the 20-HE, they gave it to athletes. They found that when they stopped training, the people on the 20-HE, they did not lose that much gains. But the people that stopped training in the placebo, they lost quite a bit of gains. And in addition, they also found that cortisol levels decreased in the people taking the 20-HE. And when you think about cortisol levels going down and the aldosterone and renin levels going down, you also think maybe there is part of the benefit is it has an anti-mineralocorticoid / glucocorticoid effect, which is pretty helpful if you're like trying to maintain muscle mass.
Similar to like trend.
I mean, yeah, sure, that aspect of the trend, maybe, like, but not like the androgenic aspect. And we need to think about plant compounds. Plant cholesterols, they don't induce transcriptional changes in the genome. So like, that's why they don't suppress you. If you take ectosterone, it's not going to the androgen receptor. It's probably targeting some surface receptor that has nothing to do with the androgens, like this mast receptor, receptor we talked about. And the estrogen receptor beta thing, if it was true, where they say, oh, it's an estrogen receptor beta agonist, then you probably see some kind of feminizing effects, which we don't see. You might see some suppression of LH if it agonizes estrogen receptor in the hypothalamus. We don't see that, so we don't know really how it works. But what we do know is, in specific to Ajuga turkestanica, there seems to be a unique effect from 20-HE where it actually can promote erythropoiesis. And we know from the literature that agents that can increase red blood cells tend to also be anabolic. So from one of the clinics in Uzbekistan, they found people with iron deficiency anemia. They gave them a very, very small amount of Ajuga turkestanica, the real deal. Pretty much they found that it was a very good adjuvant treatment with iron and increasing their hemoglobin levels, where if you just took iron alone, you couldn't expect to see this change. So that might suggest that it increases like transferrin levels, or it has some downstream erythropoietic effect that we see with anabolics. And another study looking at diabetes, they found people with type 2 diabetes, they gave them Ajuga turkestanica, their fasting glucose went down, their postprandial glucose went down. A lot of compounds in nature do this, berberine, whatever. So I'm not going to get too hung up on that.
What I really want to know is, does this stuff actually work? Because Huberman said that this stuff was as strong as Deca. Is that true?
I did give Turk to many different people, and they all reported varied effects, where some people said it just kept them up at nighttime, and it was like having transomnia, where they'd have to take it very early on the day, and when they stopped taking it, they'd still have this insomnia if they took too much of it until like 3 days later when their sleep normalized. People would also get nightmares that are very vivid, the opposite of lucid. Like lucid is like you kind of know you're dreaming. Vivid is like you don't know you're dreaming. That was the number one most reported effect. And then the second most instant noticeable effect was like water balance. People seem to dry out a lot. Like they'd be up all night peeing, they wake up the next day super tight, and they just wouldn't understand exactly if it was because their diet had changed or what's going on. But we've seen it consistently enough that people are saying they look tighter, which is not a bad thing. And it's a really good pre-workout supplement. Like when you take it right before the gym, and let's say you do some cardio or you lift some weights, you'll notice it then and there that you're probably pushing yourself harder. Is it as good as nandrolone? I don't think it is, but I don't think anyone that would consider nandrolone would also consider taking Turk, because most people would want to take Turk because like they want to stay natty. We have our own little document here. Like we literally have more than 10 different replica trials showing improved athletic performance in athletes. This one here, this is the guy that suggested it got banned. He gave Ecti at a very low dose to athletes. We're going to disregard this data here because they use a DEXA scan to measure for muscle mass, but they saw an increase in muscle mass from DEXA scans. But more importantly, the 1 rep max in the bench press went up very significantly in the Ecti group compared to placebo. And then I could go through all these other trials, but it's basically just replicas showing increased endurance, improved well-being. Yeah, I mean, I'm probably hyping it up here, but you'll never know until you try it, because you might see something that no one else sees. One cool thing about Ecti is a lot of its absorption relies on the gut biome, where they've actually like measured it in people's urine, where the amount of drug excreted in urine correlates to the amount in serum. So they gave the same dose of Ecti to different people. Some people peed out a lot of it, some people barely peed out any of it, which means that it has a varied absorption rate. So you might be a hyper responder. You'll never know until you try it.
Unless you've been living under a rock, you've seen a lot of drama about turkesterone. The purity, the quality, where the people are getting it from. Is this one actually real turkesterone? So I asked Marwan, what should you be looking for when you're trying to buy this stuff?
You can test at home if your Turk is real or not if you don't have access to a lab, where one thing I notice is the solubility tends to be much better with real Turk. Like if you just open up the capsule and dissolve it, it'll dissolve pretty freaking well. But that's not a be-all end-all test, because a company could just put in maltodextrin and it'll dissolve. But that's just one way. And the taste, you'll never know unless you taste real Turk. But if you do taste real Turk, you'll instantly find that they taste much different. And the effects, if you don't get any changes to your sleep, you're probably not taking real Turk. Like, just, this is all my opinion. Like, this is not in the literature at all. But not all Turk is created equally. The word Turk has become synonymous with just ectosteroids. I'm 100% sure that all the ectosteroid containing supplements do in fact work. When you look at the reviews on all the Turk supplements, including our own one that wasn't Turk, they were pretty staggering reviews. I mean, I don't doubt that it helped people, but I don't think it was necessarily the Turk. I think it was just the ectosteroids, and those are good supplements to include in your stack. But if you're looking for like the maxed out, most effective ectosteroid supplement, if you can find real Turk, you'll probably be very impressed.